رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah. In this new term, we're going to be starting one of the great works of intermediate Islamic theology, and that is the Hashiya of Imam al-Bajuri on the al-Sanusiyya, also known as al-Barahin. So Hashiyat al-Bajuri on al-Barahin. And today's lesson is meant to be an introduction to the subject, the authors, and the texts, right? Because we have two authors and two texts involved. We have Imam al-Sanusi, the author of the al-Sanusiyya, the matan on which the text is based, and then we have Imam al-Bajuri, who wrote the Hashiya on this work. Now, this class is meant to be for students of knowledge. So we are assuming in the class that you are comfortable with the Arabic language, number one. Number two, that you have the ability to understand an intermediate level text. And we would recommend that you only take this text, which is a level 3 text, if you've covered something in level 2, whether the Sanusiyya itself, or if you've done something like Imam Sawi's commentary on Jawharat al-Tawheed, or some other level 2 text, because this is building on that understanding. We'll be explaining it in English, but we'll be approaching many things as assumed and building upon prior study. So the subject here, we'll be delving into a structured look at the subject when we come to the opening of the Hashiya of Imam al-Bajuri, because Imam al-Bajuri covers what are called the Mabadi al-Ashara, the 10 foundational investigations. So he covers them in a systematic manner. But insofar as this course relates to intermediate Islamic beliefs, the purpose of this course is now at level 3 to deepen our understanding of Islamic theology, of the science of Aqidah, of the science of Islamic beliefs. And at level 1, we sought to understand the texts, right? To understand what it is that we believe, right? With clarity. Then, when in level 2, when we do sharh, the commentary of Imam Sawi on the Jawhara, or even the Sanusiyya itself, etc., we seek to understand the issues more clearly, more thoroughly, and have some sense of what are the bases of these issues. But now at level 3, we are now deepening our understanding of the subject, the science, the terminology, but the key issue here is that the Sanusiyya, also known as al-Barahin, it goes into the foundational proofs, right? The text is known as al-Barahin, and we'll look at the various names of the text. al-Barahin and shay asasuhu wa asluhu. The mother of something, literally, the is the foundation and basis of something. So these are the foundational proofs. And this text is this is the key distinguishing characteristic of the text of Imam al-Sanusi, is that he looks at the attributes, and each of them he goes into the proofs for these beliefs, and they're presented in a clear, in a clearly structured manner. But Imam al-Sanusi, as part of his educational method, presents the proofs, but not beginning to end. Right? He sometimes presents only parts of the logical proof. So Imam al-Bajuri, in his Hashiya here, this is what distinguishes his Hashiya, and we'll look at him. He lays out the proof beginning to end. Right? So the two muqaddimat, the two premises and the conclusion. Right? And he lays it out fully. And he explains the things out in brevity. So the purpose here is to understand the core rational proofs clearly. The core rational proofs clearly. We also deepen and broaden our understanding of the terminology and usage of the science of Islamic beliefs. So you'll notice Imam al-Bajuri opens up issues, asks challenging questions that, well, it could be this way. What about this? So we get introduced to a body of key terms and scholarly tools as relates to the approach of Islamic theology. And this is very useful, right? So at a basic level, we understand for ourselves what we believe with greater depth. We should be able to understand the proofs for our beliefs with clarity. And that's where you have a personal responsibility, right? That these proofs require reflection. They require effort. Why? Because a proof is only a proof if you're convinced by it. But for a proof to work for you, you have to exert a little bit of effort. Why? Because a proof has two components, two premises and a conclusion. Now those premises, right? So you have the muqaddimah sughra, the muqaddimah al-kubra, the muqaddimah sughra, and you have a conclusion, the natija. You can't, a proof can't just be parroted just for yourself, because you could go through the proof, say, yeah, that makes sense. But then if you have a question arise, if you're not clear on each of the premises, then it does not serve as a proof for you. And then if you go to explain to somebody that this is why we believe that God must be distinct to His creation. Why? And you just parrot the proof. So they ask you 3 questions. You're like, I have no clue. It would have been better for you not to mention the proof unless you're able to present it clearly and address the questions that would arise from it. So the proofs require a certain amount of effort. Likewise, the terminology, it's important to be clear about what the terms are and what they mean, right? And Imam al-Bajuri, we're dealing, of course, when we'll see their biographies, with 2 great masters of Islamic scholarship. It can be argued that in the later Ash'ari school, the great synthesizer of late Ash'arism is Imam al-Sanusi. Imam al-Sanusi synthesized and distilled the great theological tradition of the great masters that came before him, right? Imam al-Ghazali and Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, Imam al-Taftazani, al-Jurjani, it could be argued with that, Ibn Arafah, these great giants, and he distilled their works down to a whole curriculum of teaching texts, right? So the al-Barahin, which is also called the Sughra, right, of Imam al-Sanusi, right? And we'll look at the names of his books. We'll share a useful brief biography of Imam al-Sanusi. But the matan itself is brilliant. It's brilliant in its precision, yet its clarity. And that's why this text particularly, but the other texts of Imam al-Sanusi have served as a backbone of teaching Aqeedah in the lands of Islam. And even every text in Ash'ari Aqeedah has been deeply influenced directly by Imam al-Sanusi, including people who came soon after him, like Imam Ibrahim al-Laqani in Jawharat al-Tawheed, etc. Right? Imam al-Dardir in the Kharida. Right? He makes it clear in his commentary that even he explains why he moved away from some expressions of Imam al-Sanusi. But Imam al-Sanusi is the reference point for those who came, because he distilled the works of those who came before in a brilliant manner. But also, as some of you might recall from the commentary of Imam al-Sanusi, of Imam al-Sawi, when we looked at Jawharat al-Tawheed, as time passed, the resolve and clarity of thought of students waned. Right? So the ulama distilled the works. So we will see, for example, part of the terminology and usage is the muqaddimah, or the opening investigations that are laid out by Imam al-Sanusi. Right? And Imam al-Sanusi chose very quickly what is the core toolkit, the core framework that the seeker of the believer, the seeker of knowledge, the scholar needs to be able to understand their beliefs soundly and with clarity and conviction, but also to be able to present beliefs soundly and with clarity and conviction. But this idea of the muqaddimat, the first principles, we'll see that Imam al-Bajuri introduces a number of other first principles. And we'll point to some other complementary first principles, muqaddimat, that are useful and important. Right? These help give one a framework for oneself, for our understanding of beliefs, but also a framework by which we are able to convey to others with clarity. And when someone comes with a doubt, a confusion about faith, we have a toolkit, right? A framework that we can give them as per their need to address the issues that they have. The outcome is, what is the outcome of Aqeedah? Is yaqeen, is talabul yaqeen, right? Is husulul al-yaqeen, is gharsul yaqeen wa tanmiyatuhu, right? Is to root certitude and to cultivate certitude and to complete certitude, right? For oneself and for others, right? For oneself and for others. But an important point that Imam al-Sanusi makes, and that you would have seen before, that is made by Imam al-Dardir, right, in the Kharida, that is made by Imam al-Sawi throughout his commentary on Jawharat al-Tawheed, that's actually pointed to in Jawharat al-Tawheed itself towards the end, right, that faith is understood. Rational proofs give one a framework around our faith, but the rational proofs are not the faith itself. They're like a scaffolding that supports the edifice of faith. But what is it that sustains and nourishes faith? Imam al-Laqani says in Jawharat al-Tawheed, وَرُجِّحَتْ زِيَادَةُ الْإِيمَانِ بِمَا تَزِيدُ طَاعَةُ الْإِنسَانِ. It's chosen that faith increases with all that increases one's state of obedience to God, or to all increases to one's works and states of obedience to God. وَنَقْصُهُ بِنَقْصِهَا, and its diminishment is with their diminishment. Likewise, Imam al-Dardir in the Kharida, what did he say? Right? That all the beliefs are found in La ilaha illallah. So he says, فَأَكْثِرًا مِنْ ذِكْرِهَا بِالْأَدَبِ. So make much remembrance of the statement of divine oneness with adab, with propriety, outward and inward. What will happen as a result? You will rise in virtue to the highest of ranks. Right? So faith is not mere affirmation. That is like the good word, which is our faith, is like a good seed that is planted in good soil. Right? But in turbulent times, you need to create a protection. Right? If the soil is polluted, you may need some fertilizer. Right? So the science of theology is like the fertilizer. It is like the weed killer. It gives you all these tools to do what? To protect the faith and maybe to nurture the faith. But it's not the faith itself. Right? It's not the faith itself. Okay? And that's important to appreciate. And we'll be sharing some readings from Imam al-Ghazali, from chapter 2 of his book on Islamic beliefs, from the Ihya, etc., that highlights some of these points. So that is the outcome for oneself, but also by this level, right, in level 3, for you to be able then to convey clearly to somebody, not just the one who agrees with you, but the one who disagrees with you. Like someone comes and says, I don't buy this. So what are you going on about? Now there's some people who don't want to listen. There's some people who don't want to. But someone says, I'm not convinced. Why does this have to be true? That shouldn't be the first time you're thinking about why such and such premise is sound. Okay? And so that's why this class requires active engagement and consideration, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So this is, but also, so these are the outcomes, right? That we want to deepen our understanding of the science of Islamic beliefs. We want to understand the proofs with clarity, to understand them clearly, to know why they're sound, but also be able to present the proofs for belief in God Himself, but in all the necessary beliefs about Allah and the prophets and the hereafter. Right? So to have any individual belief, we know why do we affirm that God must be all powerful? Why do we believe in God being living? What's the basis for it? And we can understand. We understand it. We can convey it with certitude, but also to enrich our understanding of the terminology and the usage of the science, and to catch these key toolkits. And we'll be pointing these out throughout, that make sure you retain this and that, and the outcome is yaqeen, right? Is certitude for oneself, and to be able to convey certitude to others, but with that balance that this is not certitude itself. These are supports for certitude. They are not crutches. They're not crutches. Right? And that's something we'll be touching upon. Now, the text itself, the Sanusiyya, famous as al-Sanusiyya, also known as al-Barahin. Right? This text, a marvel of this text is, like the other texts in the Sanusi curriculum, is that it is brief. Right? It is a remarkably brief text, that if you look at how many pages the text itself is, it's not at all long. There's some old copies where the text is printed just in less than 10 pages, right? In the edition that I'm reading from, the text itself starts page 14, and where does it end? Yeah, it's actually 8 pages, actually 7.5 pages, right? Ends page 22, but beginning of page 22. So yeah, it's 8 pages, right? Just the text. So it's a brief text, right? And that's of its merits. A lot of people would just memorize the Sanusiyya, right? And there's no, you can't memorize every text, but the heart of it are these proofs, right? The heart of it are these proofs. And Imam al-Sanusi, of course, throughout there are many proofs. I mean, the central proof is proof for why we believe in God Himself, right? But he chooses very carefully a key foundational proof for why we believe in God. And we're going to unpack that a little more. Imam al-Bajuri himself does. There are multiple lines of how rationally we argue for the existence of God, right? But then each of the attributes, right, he gives the proof. Why? Not just for redundancy, because you can explain, you can understand your belief in God through each of the attributes of God. And you can, as a point of spiritual reflection, you can reflect on Allah's knowledge, but have clarity and certitude on why we believe what we believe about the knowledge of God. Right? And that can serve as a point of reflection, so we can go from the scaffolding of faith to the actual living of faith through reflection, through remembrance, through supplication, right? Through devotion, in which we strive to be conscious of, not of God Himself, but also of the attributes of God, right? So that is the purpose for ourselves, but also for others, that we can explain to people, to transmit certainty, because certainty is not only transmitted at the level of, okay, you should believe now, these are the proofs for why you believe, but someone's going through difficulty, someone's going through tribulation, right? And a lot of people, they don't doubt the existence of God, but they may not realize the comprehensiveness of divine power, right? So how do you explain that? Right? That is what the Sanusiyya gives, a core toolkit of effective tools for supporting certitude. The Sanusiyya also has a few other key distinguishing features. Right? So one is its brevity. Number two is its precision. Number three is its clear, focused presentation of the proofs. The fourth is its muqaddimat. He shares some key opening investigations that are particularly well considered, right? He focuses on the types of ruling, or you can say the type of affirmations. Affirmations can be rational or normative or religious, right? Or you can call it legal, right? And so this helps us have a framework of how we understand anything that is affirmed, right? And there's many other kinds of first principles, but that's one of the distinguishing features as well. He also does the same for, so he goes through the prophets, but then he goes through what is necessary, possible and impossible to believe about Allah, what is necessary, possible and impossible to believe about the prophets. And then he has a very brief presentation of the key beliefs related to the hereafter, but then he does something really powerful, right? And many were inspired by this, and different scholars have talked about it, but right towards the end, right, he tells us, and this takes the last page and a half of the text, he says that all the meanings of divine oneness are contained in La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. And he shows how, right? He shows how. And having done that, he closes with this counsel that we will read, because that tells us the first of the points of benefit, right? Which is, he says, فَعَلَى الْعَاقِلِ أَنْ يُكْثِرَ مِنْ ذِكْرِهَا. It is upon the intelligent individual to make much remembrance of this noble statement of La ilaha illallah, مُسْتَحْضِرًا لِمَا احْتَوَتْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ عَقَائِدِ الْإِيمَانِ. Keeping in mind, right, remaining conscious of the meanings of faith that it contains. And that's an endeavor that comes from the beginning, right? That you begin with this end in mind, that your faith is meanings. Your religious acts are forms, right? They're empty if bereft of the meaning of faith within them. But how do you fill them with the meaning of faith? Through reflection. Your prayer is like a cup. The true transformative light of prayer is to the extent that you are conscious of the meanings and realities of faith within your prayer. So when you say Allahu Akbar, that is a theological statement. When you say Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, glory be to you, O our God, and yours is all praise. Wa tabarak asmuka, and exalted is your name. Wa ta'ala jadduka, and high is your majesty. Wa la ilaha ghayruka, and there is no God but you. You just had, your prayer is a statement, it's an affirmation, it's a living affirmation of theology. What is the Fatiha? The Fatiha is belief. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. That's a statement of faith. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. These are all. It contains a rational proof. Why do we worship you? Iyaka na, it is you alone we worship. That's a logical statement. That given who you are, therefore, it is you alone we worship. Because we're not fools. You have honored us with reason. If you weren't real, I wouldn't do this. Okay? Imagine if Romeo goes to Layla's balcony every day, and he leaves a flower there, tells her he loves her, and then an old auntie comes by and says, Beta, Romeo beta, does Juliet exist? He says, no, she doesn't. So why do you do this? Said, I'm descended from 13th generation of Romeos. My forefathers have all been leaving a rose each night and singing a song to Juliet. Old auntie would say, Beta, go grab a cappuccino and relax. Right? She's a desi auntie in Italy. Because it wouldn't make sense. And for a lot of people, it doesn't make sense. So this is why this call at the end, right, is important from the beginning. That what you are studying is meanings that you need to strive to live, and these are meanings that you convey. When you see the scholars of guidance, and this is how, our theologians were scholars of guidance. They were not mere philosophers who just sat down and speculated. You read the life of Imam al-Sanusi, you read the life of Imam al-Bajuri. These people lived the meanings of faith, and it colored their consciousness, it colored their devotion, It colored their concern for God's creation, right? So that's how we approach it. We understand it with intellectual rigor, but these are not mere ideas, right? These are meanings that are lived for us, and that's how we need to convey it. That's why you see the great ulama of Damascus, you listen to their khutbahs. Their khutbahs are lessons in tawheed, but in a manner that is suitable for the audience. Because what is the khutbah? فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Rush to the remembrance of Allah. Our khutbah, right? Our sermon, our calling. We are calling to Allah. Right? The toolkit of Islamic theology gives us the means to remove obstacles, to clarify who your Lord is, to give others the tools by which they're able to tread the straight path of consciousness and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So these are not, it's an intellectual exercise, but it's not a merely intellectual exercise. And there's a personal commitment, which is, as you go through this, reflect on how the study of this is meant to strengthen my faith and certitude. We are going to be looking at what other sects have said and so on. We seek to understand those things, but we seek to understand it to shield ourselves from error in understanding and to be able to dispel errors in understanding from others out of nasiha. Right? This is not a sectarian exercise. It is not a sectarian exercise. So now the practical thing. How do we prepare for this? The heart of the text is the Sanusiyya itself. The matan of Imam al-Sanusi. You should be writing it out. Right? You should be writing it out. Take key notes from Imam al-Bajuri. Imam al-Bajuri's commentary on its own, it is actually one of the briefer commentaries on the Sanusiyya. Right? Of the many commentaries on the Sanusiyya, it is sort of one of the shorter, mid-length commentaries. There are some very brief ones that basically just unpack the text and don't add anything to it. Here, he explains it, he unpacks, etc. But it is on the shorter side of things. But Imam al-Bajuri often, because he's also training the student in how to think, in how to reason, in how to assess different arguments. So he goes into a lot of back and forth. In your notes, capture the key thought. Right? Capture the key thought. Right? Keep a note of where he goes into other possibilities and so on, but capture the key premise. Imam al-Bajuri, as we'll see, is one of the greatest of the late Imams of the Ash'ari school. One, because he came so late. Like Imam al-Bajuri, rahimahullah, is less than 200 years. He came less than 200 years ago, right? He was born in 1198 of the Hijrah, and he died 1277 of the Hijrah. Right? 1277 being about 160 something years ago. Right? So late, so mid, so he's in the 19th century, mid 19th century. So he's late, and he was Shaykh al-Azhar, right? And really a pinnacle of late Azhari scholarship, right? He was a culmination of a great legal and theological tradition at al-Azhar, and he represents a pinnacle in that. No one after him came at his level. Right? And then much happened after him that caused a relative weakening of al-Azhar, though there are some great scholars, amongst them those who wrote some of the footnotes to some of the editions, like al-Ujhuri and al-Anbabi, but we don't have to worry about them much. So catching those key things from Hashiya al-Bajuri is particularly beneficial. Shaykh Adib Kallas rahimahullah ta'ala, the great jurist and theologian of Damascus, he would refer to consistently to Imam al-Bajuri as Muhaqqiq Aqidat Ahl al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. He is the Muhaqqiq, the verifier of the Aqidah of Ahl al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, right? And he'd say that the books of Imam al-Bajuri are Ghaya fi al-Tahqiq. They are at a high peak of scholarly verification. Of course, there's no book that is perfect. There's no investigation that is final in nuanced matters, right? And we'll see that even from these, we'll point out sometimes when these scholars who wrote footnotes on Hashiya al-Bajuri, they themselves frequently disagree with Imam al-Bajuri, and we'll point out some of the places where he's been disagreed with on some points. But you can really benefit from this text. And one of the most distinguishing elements, one is that he presents the proofs fully, end to end. Right? He frequently unpacks each of the premises with a degree of clarity, which is very useful. He also, where there is extensive difference, he points to the difference on many points. So for example, you would have taken what is the definition of a prophet and what's the definition of a messenger. But he'll point in a brief manner to what are other key opinions that have existed. But he'll choose the opinion that he deems to be strongest. Right? So this sort of gives one a roadmap. He doesn't go into it too much, because going into the khilaf, into the nuances that are differed upon, comes later, but he sort of gives you an introduction to it. And some of them we'll point to because they are pertinent in our times. So, Hashiya al-Bajuri, we'll just leave one point. We'll be looking, when we begin the text, we'll talk a little bit about Imam al-Sanusi, but Imam al-Sanusi himself was born in the year 832 of the Hijrah and died in the year 895. And his name is Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Sanusi from Tilmisan in North Africa. And he wrote many great works, but he wrote a full curriculum starting from very short treatises that address only a few points in Aqidah, like he has a work called Sughra, then he has a Sughra, then the Wusta, then the Kubra. He also has the Muqaddimat. He has a number of works. We'll share his biography, and along with, these works are noted for their precision, their clarity, their educational method, but also the ulama found them extremely beneficial in rooting certitude in people. And that's helped also because he is someone who himself was a person of great righteousness and spiritual depth. So he's coming it with not a merely theoretical concern, but this concern that we talked about. Now Hashiya al-Bajuri, what distinguishes Hashiya al-Bajuri, so Imam al-Bajuri, as we said, born in the year 1198 of the Hijrah, died in the year 1277. His name is Imam Ibrahim ibn Muhammad al-Bajuri, and sometimes it's put as al-Bajuri. It's a very, and it's he came from a small village, and then they differ on how the name is pronounced between al-Bajuri and al-Bajuri, but you should be familiar with both. And he grew up imbibing the Azhari tradition, right? He grew up in in his home village, studied his beginning studies there, then went to Cairo, did his full study at al-Azhar with some of the great scholars there, and then started teaching at al-Azhar, and he reached the post of becoming Shaykh al-Azhar. And he was brilliant. Pretty much in any subject where Imam al-Bajuri wrote a book, his book is the best book on the subject, or one of the best books on the subject, right? So he was a Shafi'i jurist. He wrote a Hashiya on the Sharh of Ibn Qasim al-Ghazi on Matn Abi Shuja', and Hashiyat al-Bajuri, which is meant to be just a mid-sized Hashiya, mid-sized. It is one of the best books in Shafi'i fiqh, without exception, right? As a mid-sized work, right? And anyone even studying larger books, you can't ignore what Imam al-Bajuri has to say. Likewise, in Aqidah, right? He wrote a commentary on Jawharat al-Tawheed. It is the best commentary on Jawharat al-Tawheed, no exceptions. Tuhfatul Murid. The author himself, Imam al-Sanusi, wrote a commentary on his Sanusiyya, but you can't do without the Hashiya of Imam al-Bajuri. Is it the greatest of the Hashiyas on the Sanusiyya? That's at its length, nothing compares to Hashiyat al-Bajuri on the Sanusiyya. But there is a larger work on the Sanusiyya, which is Imam al-Dasuqi's Hashiya on the author's own commentary, Hashiyat al-Dasuqi ala Sanusiyya, which, due to its comprehensiveness, is extremely useful and beneficial, but it's incomparably good. Likewise, Imam al-Bajuri wrote a Hashiya on the Sullam, al-Munawwaraq, in Mantiq, and it's one of the greatest of the Hashiyas in Mantiq. He has other works in each of these subjects. We're just mentioning some to give an example. Likewise, the great work in prophetic biography, in prophetic description, the Shama'il of Imam al-Tirmidhi, there are dozens of commentaries on the Shama'il of Imam al-Tirmidhi, but the greatest mid-sized commentary on the Shama'il of Imam al-Tirmidhi is the Hashiyah of al-Bajuri on the Shama'il. It's called al-Mawahib al-Ladunniya ala al-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya, famous as Hashiyat al-Bajuri ala al-Shama'il. Likewise, he wrote a commentary on the Burda of Imam al-Busiri, and there are well over 100 scholarly commentaries on the Burda of Imam al-Busiri, and great giants have commented on it. Imam al-Sawi, Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, Mulla Ali al-Qari, Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, Shaykh Izada, Imam al-Zarkashi, and many, the great giants of Islam, Imam al-Khartuti, al-Hamzawi, great giants of Islamic scholarship, century after century. But if you want a mid-sized commentary that is incomparable in its clarity, precision, and depth, Hashiyat al-Bajuri. If someone said, okay, I can only read one commentary on the Burda, we say, raise your himma a little bit, because I just mentioned some. Ibn Allan al-Bakri, there are so many, and each has what others don't. Ibn Ajiba. But despite the brilliance of all those who preceded him, the clarity, precision, depth, and ultimately benefit of Imam al-Bajuri's Hashiya on the Burda is incomparable. And likewise, there's many other works that he wrote commentaries on, and that also he serves also as a reminder of what it means to be a well-rounded scholar. he wrote a Hashiya in grammar on the Nazm al-Ajrumiyya by al-Imriti. Right? And it's one of the great mid-sized works of grammar. Clear, precise, deep, nuanced, packed with benefit. So that distinction you see in his Hashiya here. It can be a little bit challenging because he brings his scholarly arsenal. So he asks challenging questions. It's meant to wake you up. And we're not just there to just read it and say, we finished it. But it's meant to wake you up. Another commentary that cannot be ignored, of course, is the author's own commentary. And we'll share some of these resources, inshallah, in the course forum. The author's own commentary, that's a foundational commentary. It is very beneficial. There's no way around the author's own commentary. And Shaykh Adib Kallas, for example, used to teach both the author's commentary and Imam Bajuri's commentary. Alhamdulillah, did both with Shaykh Adib. There are so many commentaries, it's not worth going into all of them, but a brief commentary that can be benefited from, and we'll share the PDF of that, is by Shaykh Muhammad al-Hashimi al-Azhari. And that's not Shaykh Muhammad al-Hashimi al-Tilimsani, the teacher of Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Shaghuri, but rather this is an Azhari, Shaykh Muhammad al-Hashimi. His brief commentary just unpacks the text of the al-Barahin. It's of the short commentaries. This is often praised by the scholars. There are, of course, numerous short commentaries. Even giants like Imam Sidi Abdul Ghani Nabulsi has a very nice commentary on it. But of the brief commentaries, that can be recommended. Of the mid-sized commentaries, the author's own commentary, right? There are a whole host of hashiyas on the Sanusiyya. We're not suggesting that you access these extensively, etc. But there are two other hashiyas besides Hashiyat al-Bajuri that the mashayikh have recommended and that are of undeniable and deep benefit. One is Hashiyat al-Sharqawi, on the commentary of al-Hudhudi. So al-Hudhudi has a very nice mid-sized commentary on the Sanusiyya, and al-Sharqawi, one of the great Azharis, has a Hashiya on it. And then we mentioned Imam al-Dasuqi. His Hashiya on the Sanusiyya is one of it's the greatest of the famous Hashiyas. Right? Sheikh Mahmoud al-Masri says there's a Hashiya of a North African scholar called al-Susi, I believe, that is even more extensive and it's full of benefit. But Hashiyat al-Dasuqi is very beneficial. We're not suggesting that you delve into these, but we're going to share them as resources. Once in a while, we'll point out things in them. There's no expectation that you read into them, don't complicate things. Sometimes if you're trying to understand something more fully, these are authoritative, reliable, beneficial works. And when I was doing the two commentaries on the Sanusiyya, Bajuri and the author's own, they were extremely useful. And of course, you can also benefit from the other works that you have already studied in Aqidah, because as you go forward, you should bring you should keep the caravan of what you have studied before with you. So this is what we wanted to share about this class that will be starting next week. We'll be starting from the opening of the text. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for clarity and certitude. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala sayyidina wa nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Any questions before we close? Sorry?
Are there short unpacking books on Hashiya al-Bajuri that help the student in understanding something?
No, Hashiya al-Bajuri, like, so I don't understand the question.
Is there a work that either has ta'liqat, Imam Bajuri's work, or even Hashiya on it, that helps explaining things that, like, if a student doesn't, like, I was reading ahead and a lot of the things was a little bit confusing to me, so I was wondering.
Good. That's why we have the class, right? I'm muted, Omar.
Yeah.
Right? No, so the purpose of the class is to understand the text, right? So what we try to do for the class, write out the text, try to get the core element. Most of the confusion is when Imam al-Bajuri goes into an issue. يمكن أن يقال إن قيل كذا اختلف, in this. So you try to come to the class, try to capture what you clearly understand, what you don't understand, and what you're unsure about, right? So there's green, red, and yellow. And then you assess the things that are clear. Were they actually clear, or was it explained to the contrary? The things that you don't understand, you have marked, so you have questions ready. Things you're unclear about, you ask, right? If they're not addressed directly. And it gets, it gets easier. Imam Bajuri has a certain style. Once you understand the style, it's not that challenging. Alhamdulillah. And Alhamdulillah, we covered this book fully with Shaykh Adib Kallas, and finished the text with Shaykh Adib. Shaykh Adib would have sofas in his house, that he'd be sitting at the sofa, and students would sit on both sides of us in his living room. Just very compact living room. But when we reached the end we were getting close to the end of Hashiya al-Bajuri, the electricity got cut. Shaykh Adib lived in the third basement down, 3 floors down in the basement. There's just a very narrow shaft window right above, but there's no light coming. So he went, got a lantern. So I said, Shaykh, I can read. He said, La, I want to read. So he tried to tilt the book ahead to read from the lamp. It was on the table in front of him, but it wasn't casting enough light. So Shaykh Adib went, sat on the ground, so there's more light coming on the book, and he read. I said, Sidi, we'll stop here. He said, La, we have to finish the book. Naqra. I said, so we reached the next section. I said, and the end part's very easy. So I said, نكمل. I said, okay. And then he said, and then he finished the text, rahimahullah ta'ala. So that's, so we read the Hashiya al-Bajuri with Imam, with Shaykh Adib Kallas, and we'll share, we'll strive to share what he conveyed of explanation of this noble text. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. We'll start the Maraqi class at 5:30.